My husband passed away on an autumn afternoon when the leaves had just started to turn and the sunlight outside was as faint as his last heartbeat. The small hospital room, sterile and humming with machines, became the witness to the very last moment of the man I had shared over 40 years of my life with. I held his hand until it grew cold, and yet just outside that door the world seemed to have already begun to move on. His funeral was quick, formal, and perfectly organized like a well-rehearsed program. But I realized that I had somehow become just a supporting character in the tragedy of my own life. No one asked what I wanted. No one asked how much it hurt. Our children, relatives, old friends, they all busied themselves with flower arrangements, seating charts, and catering for the memorial. And I stood quietly on the sidelines. "We should put Dad's photo right in the center. Don't you think, Mom?" It sounded like a question for me, but before I could even open my mouth, my daughter-in-law smiled and said, "Oh, Mom won't mind. She's never really been into these details anyway." They call me Mom, but their eyes look at me like I'm just some old housekeeper. Every time I walk into a room, their conversations change, drop to whispers, as if I'm not supposed to hear. But I hear enough. I heard my son Edward tell his wife, "I heard the house is in Dad's name. If that's true, we should start the paperwork soon." I saw my daughter-in-law Valerie holding the property deed that my husband used to keep in the safe. I don't know how she got it, but I saw the sparkle in her eyes when she whispered, "If we redo the kitchen, we can sell this place for a good price. Mom doesn't really need to stay here. She could live with her sister in Oregon. That makes more sense." I was sitting right there in the old armchair that my husband and I used to share every evening. They talked as if I had become invisible, as if I had died with him. When my little granddaughter Emily ran over to hug me, her mother pulled her back gently. "Don't bother, Grandma. She needs to rest. You can play with the iPad later, okay?" I don't blame Emily. She's too young to understand. But the adults, they've already decided I'm no longer part of this family. No one says it out loud, but in every look and every action they tell me, "We are his real family now. You're just a shadow." That evening after the service, when everyone had left the cemetery, I came home. This house where I once cared for every rose bush, every curtain, now existed only as a potential asset in their eyes. I sat at the dining table where the sandwiches from the funeral still lay untouched when the doorbell rang. Standing there was a man in a suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Miriam Hughes? I'm James R. Dalton, your husband's attorney." I was surprised. I didn't know he had hired a personal lawyer. "Yes, that's me." He stepped inside, polite and calm, looking at me with a respect I hadn't felt from my own family for days. From his briefcase, he pulled out an envelope. It wasn't thick, but it carried weight. Mr. Hughes left a few instructions before he passed. Everything regarding his will, his private accounts, and property rights is inside. He made it very clear this envelope is to be handed only to you. No one else unless you ask. I took the envelope. My heart was pounding. No one else saw that moment. No one else knows what's inside. And I decided to keep it that way. I locked it away in an old drawer without telling a soul. That night, while they laughed and drank out on the patio, as if the funeral had been nothing but another social event, I sat quietly by the window. Moonlight spilled across my hands, the same hands that had worn a wedding ring for nearly half a century. I slipped the ring off, laid it in my palm, and whispered, "My love, I'm still here, even if they've forgotten me. But I haven't forgotten you, and I know you never forgot me either. They think I am weak. They think I am naive. They think everything he left behind belongs to them, and I am just what's left." But there was something in the lawyer's eyes, a quiet sign that another door is waiting to be opened, a door that leads to the truth. I don't yet know what's inside that envelope, but I know one thing for certain: he never abandoned me. Not once. I don't need to shout. I don't need to fight. I just need to wait. Quietly. After my husband's funeral, the house quickly became crowded, stiflingly so. Not with comfort or shared grief, not with warm hugs, but with relatives. Their curious glances and hushed, pointed conversations filling every room. They didn't come to remember. They came to clear things out. Not sorrow. Things. Miriam Hughes, the woman who had spent over 30 years building this life with him, stood still in the very home we had shaped together. Barely a week after the service, Edward, my son, and his wife Valerie arrived with their kids and a couple of suitcases. "We just think you should take a break, Mom." Valerie began, her voice smooth and sweet like butter spread on toast. "Go back to your hometown for a while. Fresh air, old friends. And besides, it seems such a waste of space here." I smiled softly, though I felt the knot tighten in my chest. They didn't ask what I wanted. They made the plans for me. The armchair where my husband used to sit every evening with the newspaper, Valerie called it bulky, outdated, and had someone haul it away. The wedding photo that hung in the hallway. One day, it just vanished. When I asked, Edward said, "Somebody probably stored it away, Mom. Don't worry about it." No one asked me what I needed. They just took what they wanted. Piece by piece, the house began to be divided. Valerie took the antique porcelain set I had protected for years. "This would look perfect in our living room. I'm sure Dad would want his grandkids to have something of his," she said with a smile. I didn't protest. I just nodded, smiling faintly. In their eyes, that smile meant weakness. To me, it was a shield. I needed time to watch. One night, on my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, I caught Edward and Valerie whispering. She had a stack of papers in her hands while he was scrolling on his phone. "Whose name is the house in anyway?" Valerie asked. Edward frowned. "It used to be Dad's, but I'm sure the will leaves it to Mom. Not that she needs a place this big." I stood still in the shadows, silent. My husband had told me he wanted me to have everything to live without fear, without depending on anyone. And yet I had told no one that after the funeral, his attorney had come to me personally with an envelope. Inside was his will. Everything, our home, the family business, the savings, was left to me. And in that account, $8 million, a lifetime of his work. I hadn't spoken a word of it to anyone. I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because it wasn't time yet. The very next day, Valerie suggested that I move my room downstairs. "It'll be easier for you, Mom, and well, the kids just love the upstairs." I knew what she meant. Soon enough, my belongings were shoved into a corner. The hand-knit blanket I had made one winter was left by the trash. The pillow my husband had always used was replaced, to match the bedding, Valerie said. I quietly gathered the few things that were still mine, as if collecting the fragments of a life that had been trampled by greed. That night, I sat alone in the corner of the kitchen. The warm yellow light fell across my silver hair. I brewed myself a cup of tea like I had done for decades and opened an old photo album. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, each one holding the smile of a time when we were still a family, when Edward was little, when this house was still a home. Now this place is no longer a home. It's a battlefield of greed, a place where I, the wife and mother, am treated like something old and in the way. And still I smile, because I know exactly who holds the power. I have the papers, I have the assets, and most importantly, I have clarity. Edward was once a good boy. Valerie once called me Mom with genuine affection. But what I see now are two ungrateful souls, convinced that my silence is weakness, that my quiet is consent. I sit still in the middle of this storm like a lake waiting for the wind. My husband once told me, "When people are greedy, they reveal themselves without you lifting a finger." He was right. And I, Miriam Hughes, will be here to watch it happen. Calmly, with a gentle smile. I had lived quietly for over 40 years, always the shadow behind my husband. And now, with him gone and with my own children tearing apart the house that was once a home, I understood something: patience is no longer seen as a virtue. It's treated as permission to be dismissed. So I began to plan, not to take revenge, but to reclaim my own voice. In the days that followed, I withdrew from the family's noisy routines. Valerie started to deep clean, hauling away my keepsakes without so much as asking. She even sold my Tiffany lamp on Facebook Marketplace, listing it as antique as if it were some forgotten attic junk. Edward said nothing. All I got from him was, "Mom, just let Valerie handle it. I've got meetings." And that's when it hit me. The children I raised no longer saw their mother as a person. To them, I was just another piece of old furniture to be cleared out. I didn't blame them. But I wasn't going to let it continue. I scheduled a meeting with my husband's lawyer, Mr. William Hart, a discreet and loyal friend for decades. He came on a morning draped in soft rain. I brewed tea and sat across from him in a living room that now felt like a shell. "I've reviewed everything your husband left behind," Mr. Hart said, placing a thick envelope on the table. "You are the sole heir. Cash property shares in the company together close to $8 million. I wasn't surprised. My husband had never said it outright, but I had known how he thought. What moved me was not the number. It was the fact that he left everything to me. No conditions, no division, only trust. I opened the envelope. Inside were the transfer documents, account codes, stock portfolios, and a handwritten letter. "My dearest Miriam, if you are reading this, I'm no longer there. But I know you are stronger than you've ever believed. I leave everything to you, not because you need it, but because I want you to choose the life that belongs to you, not a life lived for anyone else. With all my love, Thomas." I wept. Not for the inheritance, but because after all those silent years, I could finally hear his voice, honest, trusting, and full of love. From that day on, I began transferring the house title into my name. Quietly. No one knew. I also changed every password, shut down secondary accounts that Valerie once had access to, and hired my own accountant, a sharp young woman named Lisa, to review every transaction over the last 6 months. "I want to know how my family has been spending money," I told her. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded. I liked that professionalism. Meanwhile, Valerie started to show her frustration. "Mom, have you seen Dad's Rolex?" she asked one afternoon as I sat in the garden with a book. I looked up. "Your father didn't own a Rolex," I said gently but firmly. "I'm sure he did," she said, turning to Edward. "Didn't you say it was supposed to be passed down to our son?" Edward just shrugged, eyes glued to his phone. "She probably locked it away somewhere." Valerie gave me a sharp look. I only smiled and returned to my book. I didn't need to say a word. I was reclaiming my power piece by piece with nothing more than composure. That night, I opened a small wooden box hidden deep in my study. Inside was the real Rolex, a gift from Thomas on our 30th wedding anniversary. He had never worn it. He just kept it like a quiet promise for the future. I lifted it gently, brushed away the dust, and put it back. I will keep it as I keep the last fragments of a world I once believed was safe. In the weeks that followed, Valerie and Edward began to talk about selling the house. "Since there's no clear will," Valerie said confidently, "this house is a shared asset. We should sell it, split the money, and arrange a retirement home for Mom." I heard every word from the kitchen. What they didn't know was that William Hart had already completed all the paperwork. This house was mine, legally. I didn't walk out to stop them. I just stood quietly listening to every word as their greed laid itself bare. They think I am weak. They think I have nothing. I only smiled, a small, almost invisible smile, to remind myself, be patient. The right time will come. 2 weeks later, Lisa returned with a full report. She pointed to a neat spreadsheet. "Here are the withdrawals from your joint accounts before your husband passed. There are some questionable transactions, electronics, jewelry, even direct transfers to Valerie's personal account." I wasn't shocked. Valerie had always been reaching for money. Now it was simply undeniable. "Thank you," I said, resting my hand on the file. "I have everything I need now." That evening, I brewed a pot of tea, sat alone in the living room, and began to write in my journal. I wrote every moment down, each incident, each look on Edward's and Valerie's faces. Not to accuse, but to remember, to remind myself of how I was treated. I hold no hatred, but I won't forgive easily either. Silence is a weapon, and now it's mine. When the clock struck 10, I looked around the house, a place that once echoed with family laughter, now hollow, but for the footsteps of my daughter-in-law upstairs. I exhaled slowly. The anger had passed. What remained was a quiet, unwavering resolve. I will not be erased from my own life. I stayed there by the familiar window where the afternoon light always fell gently, like one last pocket of peace in a house that no longer felt like my own. Everything seemed the same, the teacup, the worn book, the sparrows outside in the garden, yet inside me, nothing was still. The past few months had been a quiet nightmare. Edward, the boy I once cradled in my arms, now treated me like a piece of unwanted clutter. And Valerie, the graceful, polite daughter-in-law, she once was no longer even tried to hide the disdain in her eyes and her voice. I remained silent. But that evening at dinner, something inside me cracked. The dining table, once the heart of our family, had become a place for them to measure portions of food, to count the bills that I was expected to pay but never spoken of. Valerie set a plate of cold, tasteless boiled vegetables in front of me, while their plates were piled high with meat. I said nothing. I just quietly picked up my fork and moved the vegetables onto my plate. Valerie narrowed her eyes. "You still haven't paid the electric bill, have you? I guess there isn't much left of your pension, huh?" Edward winced slightly, as if embarrassed, but said nothing. I set my fork down, calm and steady. Valerie went on, "Maybe you should think about a nursing home, Mom. You know, it just seems like this lifestyle doesn't fit you anymore. Things move too fast these days for someone like you." I smiled, just a flicker of a smile. But none of them at that table understood what that smile meant. I stood up and cleared the dishes as I always did. But that night, I wasn't just clearing the table, I was clearing my own heart. Later, when the house was quiet, I opened the small drawer hidden inside my bookshelf. Inside was a silver voice recorder I had bought weeks ago in secret. I checked it, batteries full, sound crisp. I had been recording every conversation about selling the house, about dividing what they thought was theirs. Every insult Valerie threw at me. Every time Edward turned away, unable to meet my eyes when I spoke of family memories. I wasn't recording for revenge. I was recording to protect the truth, so that one day, when they deny it all, I can stand in front of them, not with anger, but with facts. A week later, Valerie hosted a birthday party for a friend at the house. I was asked not to come downstairs. "We want the vibe to feel young," they said. I didn't argue. I stayed in my room listening to the music and the laughter floating up from below. And then through the noise, I heard Valerie's voice. "Honestly, I don't get why she clings to this house. Look at her, just a shadow, useless, but thinking she matters." The clinking of glasses followed. Laughter. Edward said nothing. Their friends laughed with them. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I cried. But these weren't tears of pain. They were tears of closure. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "I'm ready," I said. There was a brief silence on the other end, and then his gentle voice. "Mrs. Hughes, I've always trusted that you know exactly what you're doing. I'll arrange everything." I knew this would shock Edward and Valerie, but I also knew my silence all this time had never been weakness. It was a choice, and now I was choosing not to be silent anymore. That evening, I sat again at that same dining table, this time alone. I poured myself a cup of tea, as if waiting for an important guest. No one in this house knows that in just a few days, everything they think belongs to them. The house, the bank accounts, the company Thomas built will no longer be within their reach. Not ever again. I lifted the cup, gazing into the empty space ahead. No anger, no bitterness. Just a woman forgotten for far too long, finally preparing to stand tall with all the dignity and pride she has kept hidden in her quiet heart. I had been preparing for this day for 2 long months. Every word I swallowed, every belonging thrown away, every silent meal, each moment had sharpened my resolve. They didn't know that step by step, I was quietly reclaiming my place in this house, in this family, not as an old woman living off someone else, but as the one holding all the power. I called Attorney Wilson, the man who had been by my side ever since my late husband's lawyer handed me those inheritance documents. "It's time," I said simply. He understood. That weekend, I told Valerie that I wanted to invite an old friend over to talk. She looked me up and down, her lips curling. "As long as you don't make too much noise. Edward needs quiet to work." She said this while live streaming from the living room selling beauty products. I only nodded. That afternoon, I put on the dress Harold, my husband, used to love. teal velvet, soft, modest, but elegant. I hadn't worn it since the funeral, keeping it like a memory locked away. But today I wanted him to be present in me, steady and calm. When the doorbell rang, Valerie had just cleared the dinner table and Edward was watching the financial news. I asked them both to sit down. "I have something to share," I said. Attorney Wilson stepped inside carrying a black briefcase and a look of firm seriousness. Valerie raised her eyebrows. Edward muttered, "What is this about?" "I asked Mr. Wilson here to confirm a few legal matters regarding Harold's estate," I said gently. Edward leaned back in his chair, irritated. "Mom, Dad didn't leave anything. You said that yourself." I turned to look at my son. "No, Edward, I never said that. I just stayed silent." Wilson opened his case and laid out the original will inheritance documents, share transfer forms, and the title to the house. All assets in the name of Mr. Harold Hughes, including this house. 80% of Hughes and Son Logistics and a savings account totaling $8 million are legally transferred to Mrs. Miriam Hughes as his sole beneficiary. There are no disputes, no shared inheritance, and no other beneficiaries. The room froze. Valerie blinked rapidly. "What? But this house was your husband's, and the company Edward has been working there for years?" Edward shot to his feet, voice trembling. "That's impossible. Dad never said anything to me." I stayed seated, my eyes fixed on the space in front of me. "Your father believed that whoever cherishes family, whoever shows gratitude, is the one worthy of carrying on his legacy. And your father trusted me." Then I looked straight at Edward. "You never asked. You only assumed everything belonged to you." Valerie burst out, "So what now? Are you going to throw us out?" I shook my head slowly. "No, but I will be selling this house. And next week I will convene the board of directors to announce the new leadership of the company." Edward stood there in shock. He had never imagined that his mother, the woman who cooked, cleaned, and never raised her voice, could turn the entire table around in a single evening. I recognized that look. It wasn't just surprise, it was shame. And I didn't blame him, because for years I too had underestimated myself. That night, I sat in my room, the same room Valerie once wanted to turn into a yoga studio, and looked out over the backyard. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. I placed a warm cup of tea on the windowsill, my heart strangely at peace. I thought of Harold. Perhaps he was smiling somewhere. Perhaps he knew that at last I had found the strength to stand, not out of revenge, but to show that gratitude and kindness are not weaknesses. Tomorrow I will start the process of selling the house. The company will have a new leader, not Edward, not anyone else but me, until I find someone truly worthy of carrying on Harold's legacy. That night, for the first time in 3 months since he passed, I slept soundly. Not because of the money, not because of victory, but because I had taken back my voice through silence when it mattered and action when the time was right. That morning I woke up earlier than usual. Soft sunlight filtered through the curtains, spilling across the room, the very same room I had once been pushed out of and that now belonged to me again. The house was unnervingly quiet. No Valerie complaining about taking out the trash. No Edward arguing with the kids. No slamming doors. No furniture thrown around. I exhaled slowly. Today was the day I was leaving. My suitcase had been packed the night before. I wasn't taking much, just a few favorite clothes, an old photo album, one of George's books, and the folder of legal documents that confirmed everything I had inherited. The papers were signed. The house was sold. The assets had been transferred. My shares in the company had been withdrawn. Everything clear and legal beyond dispute. This house would soon belong to a charity that cares for elderly people who have no one left, people who once were just like me. I stood for a moment in the living room, the heart of this house. Here George and I had danced for the first time after our wedding. Here I carried Edward home from the hospital, becoming a mother for the first time. Here I once believed that love would be the foundation that held a family forever. But everything that happened after George passed had taught me something different. Nothing is secure when you let others decide your worth. Then came hurried footsteps. Edward, hair messy, wearing an old t-shirt, ran in panic all over his face. I I heard you're leaving. Why, Mom, did you really sell the house? You can't do that. I looked at my son, the same little boy who used to cry Mom in the middle of a nightmare, now trembling not out of love, but out of fear of losing property. Edward, I said softly, I'm not selling your house. I'm selling mine. Valerie came rushing in from the kitchen, pale and tense. What are you going to do with the money? And what about pulling out of the company? That was George's work. I cut her off with a gentle smile. And George left it all to me. The will is clear. I am only carrying out my husband's wishes. Her voice rose sharp with anger. But we've been here. We've taken care of this place. We've done everything. I nodded. Yes. And you also pushed me aside, insulted me, and threw out my things as if I were a burden. And I stayed silent until it was time to speak. Edward lowered his head. Maybe for the first time he was seeing the cost of his own neglect. I looked into my son's eyes and whispered, I don't hate you, but I no longer have the strength to live in a place that's no longer a home. Now I choose to leave, not because I'm forced out, but because I can. Outside, a car horn sounded. The driver arranged by my attorney had arrived, a sleek black SUV, polite and understated. I picked up my suitcase and walked out of the house, each step a piece of my own late-blooming growth. Neighbors stood outside, smiling kindly. Miriam, you're incredible. I hope you find a new kind of happiness. We've always admired your grace. I nodded back, smiling, not the polite, restrained smile of the past, but a smile of freedom. As the car rolled away from the street I had known for decades, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Ahead of me was a new chapter 1 that required no permission, no endurance, no explanation. I pulled out my phone and sent a short message to my lawyer. Thank you for helping me reach the end of this road. Now I'm ready to start my own. I turned on the radio. A woman's voice poured out strong and gentle. You can't break a woman who rebuilt herself. I leaned my head against the window, watching the sunlight flicker through the trees. I may not be young anymore, but I have never felt such hope. Because sometimes walking away with a smile is the loudest declaration of all I have lived. I have suffered, and I have risen.